Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome, everyone. This is Ihsan, and one of our live streams, essentially tea time in a sense. I pray that you're all well, inshallah. I'm going to wait a few minutes before diving into the topic at hand, just while we wait for some people that are going to be joining us. But in the meantime, let me know who's here. Nice to kind of see where you guys are coming from. So welcome, everybody. And I see Brother Zafar and Brother Rehan. Welcome, you too. MashaAllah, Brother Muhammad. Welcome. Good to see you. And thank you for the feedback, by the way, Brother Muhammad. I've been waiting to respond to your message a bit more thoroughly, but with the flood of my typical inbox, it just keeps getting pushed down. So thank you for the feedback on the audio. Welcome, Helena. MashaAllah. Welcome as well, Aisha from Uganda. Yes, mashallah. Good that I'm starting to begin to recognize some familiar people, familiar names. Sister Tamara, welcome. Okay, so you've got the nickname there, Sisters Forever. Now I know who that is. I should remember, hopefully, inshallah. Iman, welcome from Toronto. Jonathan, welcome, mashallah. We will try to end on time because we've got an Awakenings Academy session starting right at the top of the hour after this, which in fact Brother John is going to be conducting a meditation class, a moving meditation. So we'll do our best to finish on time so that you can get to that and everybody will be ready for that, John. Mary, welcome from Austria, mashallah. Welcome, everyone. Sidi, is that Sidi? Mashallah. And where are you now, Sidi? You've been traveling. Melanie, welcome. Good to have you from Canada. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah to everyone. It's good to have you guys. So we're going to jump into this topic, the deeper dimension of fasting. I mean, there's some things that I wanted to do to just kind of stimulate the conversation, get it going, some principles and some ideas that I'd like to share with you guys. But let me know if there's anything around this topic that you're particularly interested in, so that we could kind of include that in the conversation. Excellent, Brother Rehan. Our salams to your family. Inshallah, may Allah protect and preserve you all and grant you a beautiful and luminous Ramadan, inshallah. So we are just about a week away from Ramadan. It's coming very quickly. So inshallah, our intention to hold this session is that Allah prepares us mentally and spiritually to welcome this holy month and to welcome it with the intention to meet it, inshallah, and to experience it with excellence for the most benefit, inshallah. Kasim from down under, Australia, welcome. Welcome, Marianne. Samir, wa alaikum salam. So let me know if there's anything around this topic. And the way that I phrased it, maybe it's a way that it's not typically spoken of, the deeper dimension of fasting. So I'll wait another minute or so, and then we're going to dive into it, inshallah. Okay, so Sister Tamara is saying what kind of foods I recommend and how to structure the day, or how I would try to structure my day. Okay, yeah, that's a very good question, Sister Tamara. Inshallah, we'll touch on that. And Aisha saying, would you advise a person who's unable to fast due to health reasons to do so, that they get the spiritual benefits of fasting? That's also a very good question, Aisha, because a lot of times people are not able to observe the full fast. So I'll give you a suggestion as to that at some point in this discussion today. And also, we have a lot of times people that are brand new Muslims, or people that might be in some way or other unable to do the full fast. And so the option isn't just to fast or not to fast, but I'll tell you what I recommend typically in those circumstances. Any recommendations? Fasting is difficult to the medical. So similar question. The guilt of not being able to fast from food 100% hinders my spiritual progress. So, again, this is the same question essentially, and I will address that, Marmar. Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's start this discussion, and I will do my best to come back to these questions that you guys have posted. MashaAllah. Welcome, sir. Wa alaikum salam. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We will begin, inshallah, with the name of Allah Almighty, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and also by extending and sending our prayers and our salutations on His Messenger, the last and final of God's great messengers, Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last and final prophet of Allah, who came in a long line and succession of prophets, and who came with the completion of the prophetic path. Islam is not a new religion. It's not even a different religion. There are different religions now that exist in the world, but the religion of all the prophets of Allah is one. Every single prophet of Allah that came to humanity taught fundamentally the same religion. There may have been some subtle and slight differences in particulars over time. Just, simple practical differences, some dietary differences, things like that. Small differences, not big differences. But in essence, the religion has always been fundamentally the same. And essentially, that is the religion of surrender, surrendering to the will of Allah. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in establishing religion, the method, the path of surrender, in its perfection, in its completion, established a holy month of fasting, an entire month, 30 days of fasting for believers. This is really important, not just for obvious reasons or for the reasons that we typically tend to associate with fasting in Ramadan, but there are a lot of implications to this. Nevertheless, Allah Almighty, right, in the religion of surrender, has asked us to fast at a minimum of 1 month every year, 30 days Ramadan. And not only in Ramadan, there are other days throughout the year that we are encouraged to fast. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ fasted extensively throughout the year, especially in the months of Rajab and Shaban, especially in Shaban, and other times, right? There are special days, the day of Ashura, and many other days throughout the year that one can show piety, love, and devotion to Allah by fasting. And it's a optional form of worship, and it's more than just what we typically understand worship to be. So I wanted to have this discussion because fasting has both an outer, like everything, right? Like everything, there is an outer and an inner dimension to it. There's an external and an internal dimension and aspect to fasting, just as there is to everything else. There's an internal, external dimension to prayer. And physically, we are going through the postures of prayer, standing, bowing, prostration. But internally, what are we doing? And the prayer is only complete when we observe to the best of our ability. We try to learn, we try to develop, to observe the essence of the prayer inwardly as well as outwardly. And the essence of prayer is submission, it's surrender. So not only do we physically surrender our bodies, and this is part of the holistic nature of Islam. Islam is a very holistic path, religion, right? And is, again, it is the religion that Allah has established for humanity. It is a holistic path. Right? The way of Allah is a holistic path. It doesn't separate between the physical and the spiritual. These are both combined, these are both integrated. And unfortunately, in the modern world, we tend to separate everything due to secularism, due to the schism between religion and science, especially specifically in the West. We've tended to now develop this fragmented worldview where there is religion and then there is the rest of our lives, the practical life, work and business and health and all of that. No, Islam is about integration. It's about oneness. It's about integrity. It's about wholeness. And so everything in Islam includes everything. It's the body, the mind, the spirit. It is all meant to come together in the worship and in the service of Allah. And everything affects everything. Your mind affects your body affects your mind. So this is one of the things that I point out in the Ramadan Success Program, which is, I'll mention it later as well. It's a course that I created a couple of years ago for the month of Ramadan, right? To try to get the most benefit from this holy month. So the point here is that, and I'll explain that a bit later, but the point is that everything affects everything. Your mind affects your body affects your mind. And your state of your emotions, your heart, your let's say your spirit, the state of your soul affects the thoughts that you attract, the thoughts that you generate. And the thoughts that you generate affect your spiritual state. So everything is one. And what I want to do is encourage us as Muslims, as believers, as people of faith, to approach religion and faith holistically and to realize that excellence in the religion, spiritual excellence, is excellence in every area of our lives. Because how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if we approach our eating with excellence, we will approach our prayer with more excellence. If we approach our work with excellence, with presence, with excellence, it's not just meaningless chores and tasks, projects to do and get done and get out of the way. We approach them with love and with excellence. We will approach our meditation, our dhikr, our prayer with excellence. So one of the key principles or points and realizing and recognizing that we are an integrated being and we must seek to honor ourselves or honor what Allah has created in its totality, in its completion, to the best of our abilities in its perfection. So everything, as I said earlier, has an outer dimension and an inner dimension. And we know about the outer dimension of fasting. That is the rules of fasting, the regulation of fasting, to abstain from food and drink from early dawn up until sunset. And, that's the essence of it, right? To abstain from food, from drink, from intimacy with one's spouse, right? To fast from these physical, let's say, needs or requirements or dimensions of our lives. But what is the internal dimension of fasting? What is fasting internally? And that's kind of what I want to point out, because again, we're very familiar with the external qualities of fasting. But what we've got to also give a lot of attention to is the internal dimension of fasting, because the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said that there are those who will get nothing from their fasting except hunger. They're fasting. They're going through the physical act of fasting, but they're not getting a spiritual benefit from it because they're ignoring its internal dimension. That's the implication. And then the hadith actually continues to say there are many who pray, but get nothing from their prayer, get no benefit from their prayer except sleeplessness. He's talking about praying at night, standing at night for prayer, which is one of the most meritorious and virtuous things that believers, that worshipers of God can do, to arise at night when everyone is sleeping and to stand in the presence of Allah and pray, worship, become present, meditate, dhikr. But the Prophet ﷺ said there are many who are doing that and they're getting nothing except for sleeplessness. They're just getting tired. That's heavy. Think about it. Right? Because we just think that if we do these physical things, if we just go through motions, then we've checked off the box and we get the reward. There's a reward, yes, for obeying Allah's commandments. There is, of course, a degree of intention there that will be rewarded. But that's a minimum. There's so much more. And so even with regard, that specific hadith is pointing to the inner and the outer dimensions of all forms of worship. So if we think about fasting, what is fasting? It is restraint. It is withholding oneself. It is discipline. It is abstinence, abstaining from things that we typically want or need. And it's not just physical things. That's the outer dimension of fasting. What is the inner dimension of fasting? How do we fast internally as we're fasting externally? So there are some clues. For example, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ describes, don't fight, don't argue when you're fasting. If somebody tries to create a problem, say, I'm fasting. Right? Not to succumb to the drama, the conflict, the violence, the negativity, etc. Right? Because that would, you're not eating, right? If you get into an argument with someone, you're not breaking the fast by drinking or eating or anything else, but it is now you're invalidating another aspect of the fast, which is its internal component. And what is that? What is it that we're supposed to be fasting from internally? So Malik is saying we fast internally by not feeding the ego. Exactly. That's it. And that's what I want to discuss a bit more for for this for the session here tonight. What does that mean to not feed the ego? What does the ego consume? The body is one aspect of the ego, but the mind is another aspect of the ego. Right? The gut is one aspect of the ego. I talk about this a lot. I mentioned it last time in one of our live streams as well. The various levels of consciousness and localizations of consciousness. And the belly, right? It has its food, its sustenance. But the other aspect of the ego is the mind, the psyche. What does that feed on? What does that constantly require for its sustenance? And remember, we are neither one of these things in reality. You're not your gut, you're not your mind, you're something much deeper. And then again, we talk about the heart. That is the doorway into the key to the doorway to who and what we truly are. Spirit, not mind, not thoughts, not physical form. We're using this dress. It's part of it's a vehicle that Allah has presented, given to us as a gift. Must be honored, must be nourished, must be taken care of with excellence. However, it's not who we truly are. It will be left behind. What continues? So, what does the ego feed on? What does the ego feed on? And feel free in the chat if you guys have any thoughts or suggestions. Remembering that fasting is what is designed to truly submit and surrender the self. Right? So Malik is saying the dunya, and what I would, and that's good, that's true. And if anything, that's part of it. Absolutely. Things of the dunya. But what exactly, right? Because the gut also feeds on the dunya. What does the mind feed on? So fasting is unique amongst the different forms of worship. And Allah says fasting is for me. It's the one form of worship that Allah claims for himself. So think about this. Abstinence, and we can say transcendence, is only for Allah. Everything else is for the individual. Our prayers for us, our zakat, our dhikr, these things are for us. But fasting, Allah says, is only for me, and I will reward for it. The reward for fasting, I will provide. And what is that reward, by the way? What is the reward for fasting? And ultimately, if you're fasting from everything of the lower world, what then is your reward as a servant of Allah? If not Allah's presence, Allah's nearness, Allah's love. So let's see. Walaikum salam, Butler. MashaAllah. I may be in San Diego in a few months. Helena is saying ego feeds on animal desires. Yes. Right? And Aisha, ego feeds on worldly desires. Okay, yes, you guys are saying that. Hasna, Sister Hasna, ego feeds on anxiety and fear. So now we're moving into the direction of something specific as to subtle forms of sustenance for the ego. Right now, think about it. Your ego is constantly, the ego, the nafs, the self, the mind, the psyche is always feeding. It's constantly consuming. It's constantly taking in sustenance. And typically, what it feeds on is, yes, absolutely, anxiety and fear are definitely things that the ego feeds on. So they're saying everything that is not divine. Sure, we can say that, and how we would define that perhaps is one can say that which is material or that which is dark versus that which is light and subtle and transcendent. Iman is saying resistance. The ego absolutely feeds on resistance. Do you guys understand what are you guys, is this, I understand, I realize that some people may be totally new to this type of conversation, maybe new to my channel or my content. If you have questions about any of this, put it there so I can try to address it as well. Because some people are familiar with some of this language, some people may be totally new. So feel free. So the ego feeds on Rehan, ego feeds on narcissistic behavior. Absolutely. Aisha is saying the mind feeds on knowledge. Yes, it does. Information, thoughts. And Jonathan, ego feeds on what affirms its existence. Jazakallah khairan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and your household. Inshallah, ameen. Welcome from Germany. MashaAllah. Welcome, everyone. Hasna is saying ego generally feeds on density. So there are two different types of density: material density, and what can we say? Spiritual density, I suppose, a subtle form of density, which would translate as negativity. Dense thoughts are negativity. Dense thoughts, right? Subtle density are negative thoughts. The ego feeds on that as well. So these are things. So here's the other thing. When we're fasting physically, we're actually taking away power and strength from the ego, because the ego is not just the mind, it's the body, it's the gut and the mind, the lower ego, the lower self. There's also the higher self. As you restrain the body, right, as you discipline and withdraw strength and power from the body, you're also going to concurrently begin to take strength away from the mind. This is why fasting, right, the entirety of fasting, physically and then spiritually, but just the physical aspect makes spiritual fasting so much more effective. Right? Physical fasting gives you more power over your mind, gives you more control over your mind, gives you more heightened sense of awareness over the mind. There's less energy at the ego's disposal, even for thinking and for thoughts. When a human being is truly famished and emaciated, you don't have energy to even think. For drama, you just automatically enter into presence. Ultimately, when a human being is truly exhausted, has anybody ever experienced this? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? This is sometimes what people experience through physical exertion, is this euphoric state of ecstasy, because it pulls you into the present moment through physical exertion. Thank you, Sister Sahar. Jazakallah khairun. May Allah reward you. I've shared this story with our group in Awakens Academy, I believe, before, that I remember this distinctly because it was such a profound experience one time when I was running in the hills. And, after a good run, walking back through the park to the car, and I just was overwhelmed with this sense of awe and gratitude and almost bliss and euphoria that I was like 19 years old or so at the time, maybe 20. And I just fell into prostration out in the middle of the park, and I was just at that time just beginning to learn Islam. So It was very early. I don't even remember at what point that was. Very early in my religious path in suluk, right? But I just fell into sajda, and that was part of that was directly due to just physical exertion, which brings us into a state of presence. So when we are fasting, we are also now spiritually moving into presence. And so if we enter into argument, conflict, drama, that is taking us out of presence. That's taking us back into density. That's taking us back into darkness. And so we restrain, we withdraw. Like, don't ruin the fast. And you're moving in this direction. No need to get pulled back into dunya and into ego. So these are all great answers, guys. And really, I want to get you to, you know, have this, inshallah, intention and this thought and awareness throughout this holy month that not only will you be paying attention to what you eat and what you don't eat, but also, right, the state of your mind, of your consciousness as well throughout the month. And one of the most important things that we can do is to be in dhikr, be in dhikrullah, more so, much more so in Ramadan. It'll help to keep you in a state of presence. It'll help to keep you in a state of presence throughout the month. And yeah, so I wanted to also speak a little bit about other aspects of fasting, and maybe I'll touch on it briefly. But I'll leave it at that for the moment. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this. Yes, Juice, absolute flattery. So again, when you're fasting, you're going to have a more heightened sense of awareness of all of these things, right? If you're, especially if you're thinking about this, you'll have a heightened sense of awareness of how all of these things around you, you can now consciously step back from, right? And do the work. And it is work. Spiritual progress requires work, like real spiritual progress, real spiritual growth. Again, we can master the basics, or at least complete the basics of the religion, its requirements. Quite simply, we can make sure we check off the boxes and do our prayers and make sure we meet the requirements, physical requirements of fasting. But really, that's just a vehicle for development. We will spend a lifetime developing excellence and sincerity, ikhlas. Like that, a lifetime. It's a never-ending journey. That's the beauty of the path. That's the beauty of faith and religion and spirituality. There's no end to one's development. There's no end to the depth that one can go in anything, in fact, right? In anything. So the essential reminder here, or idea, right, is that not only do we as human beings, if we're going to get closer to Allah, which is the point of all of this, which is the point of the religion, to get closer to Allah, to do our best, at least from our side, that His mercy will raise us. We have to overcome not just the lower self, which is the gut, the belly, the physical drives and desires, but also the mind and what that is sustained on. And so this Ramadan, we have an opportunity to do our best with Allah's love and mercy, that He grants us support and power to truly fast, wholly, completely, right? Meaning outwardly and inwardly, to enter into presence and to fast not just externally, but also to fast from all of those things that you guys mentioned that the mind requires. And the essence of it, one of the core components of what the mind is sustaining, the ego, the mind aspect of the self. This is what I would equate to in the Quran as nafs al-lawama. What that feeds on, what that requires, are thoughts. Thoughts. And so learning to enter into stillness while fasting is now a beautiful and holistic fast, a complete fast, an outward and an internal fast. Entering into submission and surrender inwardly while one is fasting outwardly. And the reward for that, as Allah says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, real fasting, He will grant that reward. And one more thing that I want to mention, right? We don't really think about this because it's not, I don't hear it enough in the community, in lectures and talks and so on. But what is the reward of this religion? Like, really, what is the reward of this religion? We typically think, okay, paradise. And if you're a good believer, if you follow the path and the religion, inshallah, Allah will grant you paradise. Is there more? What's the true reward? Right? And the real reward of this faith, of religion, is not paradise. The real reward is the creator of paradise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's something that the mind really can't grasp. We don't have a reference. There's no way to understand it. There's no way to understand what that actually means. We can understand paradise because we have symbols that refer to what is in paradise based on what we experience in this world. But Allah, that's something that can only be experienced through total transcendence of this world. And based on those who have reached to heights of spirituality, the entirety of this world, all of the pleasure of this world is not even a drop of pleasure in paradise, right? Of joy and happiness. Everything that we can imagine in this dunya, in this world, is not even a drop of ecstasy that is available for they who are rewarded with paradise. And all of the paradises are not even a drop of the reward that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. And there are different levels in paradise too. There's levels and levels and levels in paradise. And the higher that one is granted by Allah in, let's say, in the levels of paradise, the nearer they are to Him, the more they're experiencing Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what Allah gives, the Prophet ﷺ gave an example of this. He said that on Yawm al-Jum'ah, on Fridays, Allah will unveil Himself for all of the inhabitants of paradise. Now, some inhabitants of paradise at higher levels of paradise are more and more in Allah's presence directly, witnessing and experiencing the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But once every week, and only Allah knows what that means, right? Allah will unveil Himself to all of the inhabitants of paradise on Fridays, and everyone will forget all of their joy, all of their pleasure, all of their enjoyment, everything that they're experiencing in paradise. They will completely forget it. They will be gone. They will forget all their pleasures. They will be lost in the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will be completely engulfed in His glory because there will be nothing greater to experience. And there's a hadith Qudsi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known, so I created. The purpose of creation is to know Allah. That's the ultimate purpose of creation. That's the ultimate purpose of creation. And so, that is the ultimate reward. And when we do our best in this life, not just to meet physical obligations and check them off a list, Ramadan done, Fajr done, Zuhr done, etc., Zakat paid, check, but when we really strive and struggle, maybe struggle is not the right word, although there is struggle is essential component of the path, but when we really yearn for the internal aspect of all of this worship, that then is the reward that Allah says, I will reward that servant. And the ultimate reward is His presence. So, inshallah, may Allah Almighty Subhanahu wa Taala continue to guide us. Let me go back to some of these questions that came up earlier. And I do want to make sure that we do finish on time because we do have another session at the end of the hour here in the academy. So, Sister Tamara was asking, right, what kind of foods do I personally recommend and how do I structure my day? In terms of foods, and I do speak about this quite at length in the Ramadan Success Program, foods that are light, right, better. Try not to eat heavy. The denser the food, the denser we become. So the denser that we become, the heavier that we become, the more lazy, the more lethargic, the more bound by gravity we become. So the foods that I recommend more so are light foods, luminous foods, foods that are light and subtle in nature, not too heavy. If fasting is done properly and with excellence, it will completely heal the body. It will heal the cells, the body, everything. But unfortunately, typically, because we're only observing, Muslims generally tend to observe just the outward aspect of the fast. We don't pay attention to how we fast. And so we fast, and then typically we feast. And that's very counterproductive. All kinds of rich foods, fried foods, heavy foods, dense foods. This negates the benefits of fasting. Yes, you met the basic requirements of fasting, but this is far from the spirit of fasting. So the foods that I recommend, and may Allah give us power to remember and to apply, are luminous foods, light foods, and to eat light, not to overeat. One of the most dangerous things that we can do is to overeat during Ramadan. Think about it. The whole discipline is about self-restraint. It's about keeping the self in check. And when is a more difficult time to keep the self in check than when you've not eaten for, 14 or 16 hours? Like at that point, it's the most difficult to not overdo it. But if we can learn to take just and to know, right? You have to know ahead of time what is enough. And this is enough, like a small amount. Like we actually don't need very much to survive. And not even just to survive, but to thrive. Like all modern scientific studies have clearly proven that the human being, the human body functions optimally with caloric restriction. Right? When we eat less in terms of intake, the body is optimum, it's prime, it heals itself. There's been a lot of research in this area in modern times. And now everybody's recommending fasting specifically for this. Right? There's a Japanese scientist that won was it a Nobel Prize? I don't remember when he discovered the mechanism of autophagy, how through fasting the body cleans itself out completely, gets rid of diseased and dead cells and so on through fasting. But if we overdo it with foods at the end of the fast, we actually start creating more toxicity than we are cleansing. And it puts a much heavier load on the body. It actually becomes counterproductive. So it's a real test of, let's say, focus, will, intent, and discipline to not overeat and to in advance plan to eat well. Again, it can be quite challenging when you're eating with family and at invitations and things like that. It can be a bit difficult, right? Because then you may not have so much control over. But you do the best that you can, and especially when you have control over it, my recommendation, my suggestion is to be very disciplined and plan your meals so that they give you optimum nutrition from the best quality sources of foods. And the best quality sources of foods are essentially, fundamentally, fruits and vegetables, closest to their natural state. Try not to overdo it with meat, and this is just my personal recommendation. With with meat. Try not to overdo. Try not to overdo with, especially with sugars and refined foods and refined grains. The best are simple whole grains, salads, legumes, some clean protein, and just a sufficient serving, and then just stop with that. Try not to overeat. These are what I call light foods, foods that are taking their power directly from the sun, closest into its original, right, closest to that original source of energy. So these will provide the most healing for the body. And as far as structuring the day, it varies because it depends on the time of year that Ramadan falls. So now it's a bit closer to, I guess it's going to be where we almost spring, moving towards summer. So the days aren't terribly long now. But this will vary really depending on your responsibilities, your work, and all of these things. But you do want to try to get to sleep early and as early as possible once you finish with your prayers and so on. So that's why you want to eat early on. Try not to eat late at night, and then get to sleep early so you can wake up early for suhoor. Maybe if you can, take a nap during the day. That's also a sunnah, right? To take a nap during the day to recharge, and to do our best, inshallah, to get to the mosque and to join the community in prayer for, especially for the Tarawih prayers. The other question, which a couple of you guys had, is about what to do if a person is compromised in their ability to fast. And so I've actually, get this quite a bit. And some people sometimes are quite sad that they're not able to fast. So they feel like they're going to miss Ramadan completely. And I've had some good friends and some people who have entered into Islam and have never fasted in their entire lives, and it's just too difficult for them to do. So what I suggest, again, personally, this is my personal suggestion, is to develop your capacity. Again, now, if you've got a medical condition, if you've got to take medicine, you've got to figure out how to make this work for yourself. But generally, if a person is just weak in their ability to fast, what I recommend is to do a partial fast, to fast partially. Okay. And sometimes, a lot of times, what you'll find is that you'll start to, over time, develop your capacity to fast, and your fasting window you'll be able to increase your fasting window. Again, there's no way for me to address this question in detail or specifically based on any medical conditions, but just as a general idea and principle, this is what I suggest sometimes when people ask me directly, and that's to do a partial fast. So you do the fast as best as you can, and you can decide maybe if you're going to start your fast late or end your fast early. Right? Again, this is based on limitations. So if you want to, let's say, break fast with others, with family, with community, and you're not able to fast for a whole day, then perhaps one solution is to start your fast a little bit later. You may not start at dawn, but maybe you'll have to start around mid-morning or noon or something. And then just try to keep the fast, then fast from noon to sunset, right? And that's what I would typically recommend. And then you'll be able to find that as you develop capacity and stamina, and as your body begins to heal itself, right, from any fasting will begin to help the body heal and repair itself to become stronger. You begin to find that, inshallah, you'll begin to find with Allah's mercy and will that you can go longer and longer. And I remember I had a dear friend, was afraid that he's going to miss Ramadan completely, that he will not be able to fast. He said, "There's no way I can do it. I'm not able to. I don't have that level of physical stamina." And I suggested this, and by the end of the month, he was fasting the entire day. But again, he started with a partial fast. So that would be my suggestion as a general suggestion, right? If you can't fast the entire day, develop your capacity. I always recommend developing capacity incrementally, and just do your best. And Allah is, of course, merciful, compassionate, loving, kind, and He will support. And the human being who does with difficulty something that others do with ease, they get more of a reward. Right? So, inshallah, hopefully that helps. Marmar, thank you. Jazakallah khairun. MashaAllah. May Allah bless you all. Much appreciated. Yeah, so John confirmed he did receive the Nobel Prize, Jonathan, for discovering autophagy. You know, it's interesting. I remember when I first started fasting 25, 30 years ago, and when I started practicing Islam, and everybody would tell you, well, what are you doing? This is ancient times. This is backwards. It's not healthy. You know, you need to eat. You need to be strong, and so on and so on. And subhanAllah, in the last 10, 15 years, all the research is pointing to fasting. It's one of the greatest things anybody can do for health, for healing, for rejuvenating the body, for curing diseases or dealing with diseases. So, subhanAllah. Okay, Sister Tamara is saying, Wayakan, you're welcome, Sister Tamara, for the topic. And she started listening to Ramadan Success Program and such a great resource. Yeah, I mean, inshallah. So that's the intention, right? Hopefully that you can really make this month something special, more than just, one aspect, but complete, holistic, inshallah. Bridget is saying, it's ironic that the tradition is to overindulge in parties at sunset instead of continuing in elevated stages for the rest of the night. Indeed. So one of the things that I think we have to accept is that everybody is at a different place. Everybody's at a different stage and at a different state. And if you're here and if you are, engaged in this conversation, this may not be particularly relevant or interesting to a lot of other people. But it is for you. You guys are here. You're watching this. You're listening to this. And so this is for you. This is part of your path. Right? Let's say this type of conversation is part of your destiny. Right? What Allah is providing for you. And the majority of people, everybody's at different states. We have to be willing to push further than others may be. Ourselves, not them, but ourselves. We have to have the courage to believe in what is revealed and what we are led to, what Allah leads us to, and what Allah provides for us. Because the majority of people are just going along with, the world. But those who Allah calls and pulls towards Him, it's not common. It's not everybody. So one of the challenges that I've had, I'll share this story with you guys, is at some point I started to become very sensitive to foods, to what I could eat, to what I couldn't eat. And I was very frustrated for a while because I couldn't just enjoy what everybody else was enjoying. Simple things, like my body's became very sensitive to simple things. And it throws my entire system completely out of balance. So, for example, one of the things that everybody enjoys, most people, is coffee, right? But if I have coffee, and especially if I have it more than like once or twice in a week, it starts to really mess up my whole system. Like everything gets thrown off. And I start to develop all kinds of other issues around that. And that's just one simple example. There's other things as well. But I've had to accept that, I may not be able to do as everyone else does, but that's actually a blessing as well. It's not just a frustration. It's not just something that some of us may be denied, or that we just have to do with less and we're missing something. No, because oftentimes Allah is preparing us for something more. So, even if you think about vehicles and automobiles, they all take different types of fuel. like a lot of cars just take, I don't know how it is throughout the world, but in the US, you have, unleaded, like 3 levels of fuel, uh, regular unleaded, mid unleaded, and like super unleaded or something. And most cars are just fine with the base level of fuel. But then some cars require the most refined type of fuel. And if you put the regular fuel in them, they're high performance vehicles. They just like they'll get destroyed. You'll ruin the engine. And I think that it's not wrong or inaccurate to say that spirituality is about evolving the human being. It's about um, advancing and progressing the human being. And again, that also involves the body. The body structure also begins to change as well with spiritual practice. And if your soul is destined for that, with or without spiritual practice, maybe you're just going to be naturally more sensitive as a human being, and your body will as well. You've got to learn to work with that and to honor it, so that your body can carry. And because this is what I've realized, some bodies, some souls, you cannot subsist on the same type of things that everyone else is okay with. Like it might kill you, it might destroy your system, especially when it comes to this topic of density versus light. So I had a very good friend who for many years we struggled and suffered together in a very difficult situation. And he was he almost died due to all kinds of physical complications, just because he and I suffered as well, but he was even more sensitive than I was, especially at that age. And he almost died, and he couldn't figure out what was going on. Every time you go to the doctor, they'll just, nothing's wrong, or prescribe him certain, different types of suppressive medications. He was close to dying, and he had ended up in the emergency room several times. But eventually, he figured out that by changing his diet, like he couldn't eat anything dense. He in particular went completely to a raw food diet. And after 7 years plus of misery and suffering and pain and agony, his body started to heal itself and repair itself. And he began sharing some of these things with me once he started getting results with it. And so his system was so sensitive and also, let's say, so efficient. And the guy was brilliant, right? Highly spiritually attuned. The insights that he would have were just utterly profound. Like, where is he getting this stuff from? It's just incredible downloads of spiritual inspiration, knowledge. Extremely sensitive soul. But he couldn't eat like most others could eat, and I eventually started having very similar issues and problems as well. So spirituality, right, does end up making people. You're going to be held accountable for more. Like you're going to have to be much more diligent or deliberate and intentional and disciplined about many things in your life, not just food, even people and company, and places, and information. Like you may not, if you are spiritually sensitive, you may not be able to tolerate. Like I'll give an example with some family. I'll go to the house and they'll be watching TV, and they're just like watching these shows all day long, which it's not particularly, like, they're fine with it. And I'm in there for like 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and I feel like I can't breathe. Like it's just like, how can you watch this chaos and this mayhem and this insanity and this drama like all day long, every day? Whether it's the news, whether it's these serials and dramas that are just ridiculous, whatever it happens to be. You'll notice too, right, that a lot of people have different levels of tolerance when it comes to even religious discourse. So when I first started studying the religion, I was suffering a lot because the group that I was with and the people that I were with were very dense, very heavy. It's all fire and brimstone. It's all hell and hell and hell. I didn't know anywhere else. I didn't know anything else. I didn't know where else to go. It's all I had access to. So I was just in a world of suffering because like my soul couldn't process it. And my soul couldn't process it. And for some people, that's fine. It doesn't bother them too much. My soul just took everything very seriously. And, this idea of everyone and everything just being burned to the hellfire was just very difficult for me to deal with. It actually complicated, it actually really impeded my worship, right? Because I didn't begin following the religion, and I didn't begin worshiping Allah because I was afraid of hellfire. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a fear of hellfire. We have to, because it's part of the religion. But that wasn't my, it's there, but that's like I didn't think, like, that wasn't my motivation. I began praying and worshiping because it just felt like the right thing to do. It felt natural. It's what my soul wanted to do. And the more that dense approach to religion was imposed on the outside, I just became sicker and sicker and sicker. And I just kept praying for guidance, and alhamdulillah, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me to my shaykh, who began to cure me or save me from that approach of religion. But I say this because I remember there was a beautiful tradition of Rabi al-Adawiyya that I came across early on. I read it somewhere. And she said, this statement of hers, she's a famous lady saint in our history. She said, "Oh Allah, if I worship you in fear of hell, burn me in it. And if I worship you in hopes of paradise, exclude me from it. But if I worship you purely for you, oh Allah, do not withhold from me your divine presence. Do not keep me away from you, Ya Rabbi." And when I read that, I said, Subhanallah, it's not the conversation I was hearing at the mosque. The mosque was hellfire or paradise. And, like, for me personally, I mean, alhamdulillah, Allah Kareem, but that didn't motivate me necessarily. Not so much. So we have to kind of come to terms with who we are individually and recognize that it may be different for us than others that we're around, and just do the best that you can to honor what Allah wills and destines for you, inshallah. Jonathan is saying, well, yeah, you guys are welcome. Inshallah, Sahar. And Dersky is saying vitamins as well, and nutrition, yes. So, and another reason why you should have really high nutrient foods. One great thing is juice, right? Like fresh juice, like juicing. If you have a juicer, or a juicer is good because you can really get a lot of nutrients in a small package. Smoothies are good too if you've got good ingredients. However, with the fiber in smoothies, right, like there's less than you'll be able to consume. So both are good nonetheless. So Jonathan is mentioning, right, closer to our hunter-gatherer lifestyle. So yeah, natural foods, basically. Whole grains, natural foods. Samantha, most welcome. For Samantha saying, Masha, thank you for this approach. I feel sometimes very extreme expectation in the Muslim community with fasting, and a gentle way to deal with limitations or learning how to. Absolutely. Yeah. We have to remember that Allah is merciful and kind, and everybody's, again, at a different level and a different state. So we're going to have to conclude, because our group has their moving meditation in just a minute or so. And if you guys need to go, John, if you have any, feel free. I'm going to wrap up here, inshallah. But we have to remember that Islam came over a period of 23 years. It didn't all come in one day. As soon as somebody said, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul, they weren't immediately, given the entire, at some point later, when there was the momentum of an entire community, that's different. But when Islam, and we're at that point now, where, like, there is no Islam around us. Like, it's again a strange thing, as the Prophet said, it will be a strange thing. It'll be lost in the world. Yes, there's Muslims and so on, but for the most part, real Islam, it's almost lost. And when the early Muslims were entering into Islam, it was a very progressive development that they went through with the Prophet of Allah, and it was 23 years, right? So it doesn't need to take 23 years now, but you can give yourself a little bit of time to develop your capacity. My Shaykh Qadasullah, when people would come to Islam, and many people, tens of thousands came to Islam through him. And they, the first thing he would say is, if nothing else, at least make sajda once a day. That's what he would start them. At least sajda once a day. And before you knew it, they're keeping all the prayers. They're waking up at night for prayers. They're doing everything. But he didn't overload them from the beginning. In the same way, we have to be a bit, compassionate, merciful, and patient with ourselves, especially new Muslims. Okay, so we'll have to conclude, guys, because I'm a bit over the time, and we do have to end. But I want to thank you all for joining me. Oh, and the Ramadan Success Program. Yes, I do have that course that is open for enrollment. So the link is in the description for this, underneath this video. It's a simple course, but it's basically a two-part course that deals with the outer aspect of fasting as well as the inner dimension of fasting, with some very detailed modules and guidelines in terms of what to eat, how to eat, even when it comes to exercise. And then also this topic of internal fasting goes to a lot of detail as to how to maximize this holy month. So for anybody that would like to kind of take this topic further and use that as a support or as a tool to make this, inshallah, God willing, the best Ramadan yet, that is called the Ramadan Success Program. And it's available for enrollment at the moment for a week or so at a large savings. And that includes lifetime access. So any updates we do in the future of the program, anyone that purchases it, you have lifetime access to the course, and you will get all those updates as well in the future, inshallah. So please, you can also definitely support, right, this channel and my platform by enrolling these courses. It's the one means that we have to be able to try to create a sustainable platform. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless and reward you all. Thank you, those of you, for your support and for your company, as well as for your comments and your interaction. May Allah Almighty subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and grant you the best and most blessed Ramadan ever. Inshallah, all of us. And may it be a healing Ramadan and an awakening Ramadan, inshallah. Jazakum khairun, fi amanullah. Anybody that has to go, feel free. I'm going to take a quick scan and make sure I didn't miss anything too critical. And if I've missed something, I'll try to read through the comments later, and hopefully we'll address them in future content. Okay, Jazakum khairun, everyone. Be well. Fi amanullah. Allah Almighty be with you and your families and loved ones. Allahu hafiz. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And my primary Shaykh Rahan was Sheikh Nazim of Cyprus. Ameen. Yes, indeed. Why don't we actually conclude with a quick recitation of salawat on our Prophet ﷺ and Surah Al-Fatiha behind that. Allahumma salli ala Sayyid Muhammadin wa ala ali Sayyid Muhammad. صلاة الفاتح لما أغلق الخاتم إلى سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والحادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. بحرمة الحبيب حمة تصير سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين يا رب. صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وسلم محمد. في أمان الله everyone. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.